Hi, I'm Joe Evangelisti.
And I'm Dom Palladino.
And this is some landlording tips that we want to bring to you today. I've been in landlording now for about 10 years. Dom,
I've been in property management and construction management for about 8 years.
Cool. So we want to run through some tips and stuff this morning that I've learned along the way. I know Dom's got some major experience in this kind of stuff, and I think that in dealing with a lot of folks that come to me for mentorship and business guidance and stuff like that, I see a lot of people hitting pitfalls, and I think there's a lot of very simple things. They seem simple, but just adding some things that might be able to help people eventually, make their landlording experience a little bit easier, and hopefully help them have a better time. What do you think, Dom?
I agree.
Awesome. So number one, I think, is having a really solid lease. I'm gonna throw a marker on the ground, you guys. You don't even have to edit that out, man. But one of the things is having a solid lease, Dom. I mean, what are some of the things that you think about when you're putting out like a solid lease?
I mean, everything has to be spelled out in black and white. You really don't want to leave any ambiguity, especially if you're working in New Jersey, a very tenant-friendly state.
For sure.
But you want everything reviewed by an attorney. You want every small detail there, so the tenant knows who's responsible for it. Because if they don't, it's going to end up biting you in the end.
100%. I think you can say yes too. I don't think that's going to worry anybody. I think that the thing about that too is I'm always looking to make sure a lease. The biggest thing about a lease, right, is probably the eviction language, right? So like when you say getting reviewed by attorney, especially all the little details are going to be important. Some of the things I'm looking for is making sure that the lease dates line up. We like to prorate, so everything's always due on the first, because as you start to add investment properties, it seems kind of mundane to make sure these things are important at the beginning, but then when you start to get to 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 units, like you look back and you're like, shit, I really wish that these things all lined up, right? When you start to making things more effective and efficient, right? So that's a tip that I would definitely give you, because at the very beginning, whenever people moved in, that's when I let the rent be due, and that becomes really a mess, right, Tom?
You can't manage that when you have 50 properties.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely making sure that stuff's lined up, and then making sure the eviction language is correct, so that your eviction attorney does not have a hard time getting people out. Because here's the truth in real estate, you're never going to not evict, right, Tom?
But an eviction ends up being a last resort. It's not something that the landlord wants to do, or the tenant.
Yep.
So a rule of thumb is, I believe it's on the 6th day.
Yep.
On the 6th day, when rent's due on the 5th, if it's not in, you send a pay rent or quit notice.
Yep.
And 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, that will scare the tenant enough to send the rent in.
Yep.
To just make them realize that you're not really playing around.
Yep.
No one wants it to get to an eviction. That's ugly for everyone. So as long as they know you're serious, that it is a possibility, that tends to get them moving with getting their money in.
Yeah. I don't want to gloss over that, because that was like actually one of the, you jumped to one of my hot topics actually. I think one of the biggest challenges, Dom, is like a lot of junior landlords or people getting into it, they're so afraid to evict because they think, like, God, I mean, this is someone that's living there, and it's someone I can't kick them out on the street. But you hit the nail on the head, man. Like, I think, I know from experience doing this for many years that you're right. 85-90% of eviction notices go out. We do not put people on the street, right? That eviction notice, if I'm a newer landlord and you're having any nervous reaction about it, understand that you're not sending that notice out with the hope that you're going to kick that person out on the street, right? Like, it happens, and what it does is it gets people understanding that you're a professional, you're going to take action, you're really trying to protect your asset. And what it does is it gets people moving, right? And they're going to find that money one way or the other, And I think that that's probably, if you're going to take away one thing from this video, that's probably one of the most important things, is just send a letter. You can do it yourself, but it costs hardly anything to get your attorney to do it. Get that letter out right away, and don't wait and be that person who waits 3 months to send the letter, because that's why you hear these horror stories of people, oh, it took me 9 months to evict. It didn't take you 9 months to evict. It took you 6 months to send the letter out, right? So that's number one. And then, just back to other lease standards, making sure the lease lines up with the type of property you have, right? So like if you have a single family house, like we have a lot of single families, that tenant is responsible for the utilities, they're responsible for snow removal, they're responsible for landscaping update and all that kind of thing. We're not going to pay for those things. However, you get into a multi-unit, if it's a duplex, you might have a tenant responsible for grass or snow or something like that, but then you start getting into 3 and 4 and 6 and 8 units, then you have to be responsible for that, right? So making sure the lease is appropriate for the type of unit that you're renting, and then obviously making sure that your assistant sets up the proper utilities and maintenance companies and stuff like that, so that stuff gets done, right? Because God knows, I've been in court multiple times in Collingswood because our tenants didn't mow the lawn and shit like that, right?
Yeah, a lot of other towns.
Yeah, so number 2, most important thing, and the reason why I think a lot of people hate landlording, right, is they don't spend enough time screening their tenants. So Don, how do we screen our tenants?
So we actually use a system called NTN. It's actually a company out of South Jersey. I used it before I got here. It's a great little program, National Tenant Network. It screens for credit, criminal, and eviction history nationwide. Mm-hmm. So it'll screen for all those things. It'll give you information on all of those items, and it'll actually give you a number between 1 and 100 of how good that tenant is for your property. A threshold that we like to use is that the tenant shouldn't be below an 80. And it takes all the criteria combined to get to that score. And then when it comes to income, we like to have income at least 3 times the rent, the monthly income at least 3 times the monthly rent. So I mean, every property is different. Every landlord's going to have different standards, but as a rule of thumb, that's pretty much industry standard.
Yeah, I love that. I love to get the story. If we have somebody who's borderline, listen, I'm the kind of guy who loves to get the story. You got to go by your gut. I really do believe that in this business, you're going to have some stories. I lost my job, I came back, my credit got adjusted. If the story matches the history, sometimes I'm cool with it. Some of my best tenants have been, they had great history and then everything came to a crash at one time and now they have a good job and you can see them cleaning it back up. You can see that story within their track record. Don't be afraid to dig a little bit further if you think you have a good tenant in your hands here. Don't be afraid to ask for a cosigner. Don't be afraid to ask for their employer and follow up and call their employer and ask them if they're indeed employed there and whether they like them or not. Character to me is a big piece of the puzzle, not just, although the number, by the way, is a big piece of it. Character can go a long way as well.
And this isn't a sales pitch for NTN, but with that system, you can actually set your screening criteria. So in the past, we've actually made non-payments for student loans or medical bills or other ancillary bills that may have not been paid by the tenant less weighted. Mm-hmm. But if they're paying their mortgage consistently, their landlord says they're paying their rent consistently, their car payment, the things that are make or break for them, that they don't want to lose their car, they don't want to lose their house, so they know that they're going to be able to find the money for those things, that's much more heavily weighted than a student loan or a medical payment that, a lot of people get into medical issues and it's no choice of their own. But if they can't pay them, but they can still pay their mortgage, then that means to us that they're much more likely to pay their rent as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and don't be afraid to call the landlord for a feedback check. But again, I kind of believe half of what I hear there sometimes because they might be leaving a landlord who's just excited to get rid of them. Yep. So you'll get good feedback from a landlord who's like, "Whew, thank God they're out of here." You know what I mean? Landlords aren't always going to be truthful with you if they're trying to get rid of somebody.
And you can never be 100% sure you're actually talking to the landlord.
Absolutely.
Same thing with an employer. Didn't make the call, but take it with a grain of salt.
Yep.
That you have no real way of knowing exactly who's on the other end of that phone.
Yeah, if I'm calling the employer, I might be, somebody works at, XYZ location and they give me an employer's phone number, I might go Google that location anyway and call the front desk or something along those lines, so I'm sure I'm calling an office line, right? Talk about maintenance for a second. Another thing that I think is a big challenge for landlords is the fact that, you have to maintain your properties, right, Dom? I think, people get stuck in this rut of, they get trouble calls. I hear this all the time. And we have tenants that will literally say to us that they stay with us because when somebody calls, we're on that scene within 24 hours and we're handling the issue. It blows my mind actually that landlords ignore trouble calls, right?
All it can do is make the situation worse if you ignore it. Now we're in a good place here where we actually have a couple guys on staff that will go out there, but for landlords that don't necessarily have a maintenance staff but have a few properties, it's going to be in your best interest to get to know a local handyman, get to know some good HVAC contractors, some good plumbers that you can kind of put the carrot in front of them that they're going to get repeat business from you if they're reliable, they're straightforward with their pricing, and that they're willing to help you out in a pinch. Because when you can take care of maintenance items quickly, it goes a long way with tenant satisfaction. And tenant satisfaction is pretty much the name of the game when it comes to renewing and getting rent on time. They want a happy tenant is really important.
100%. Along those lines, really, I'm really careful about get some sort of tenant portal as soon as you can afford to. Obviously, if you have 1 or 2 rental properties, you're not going to jump into a property-ware type situation. But when I think of maintenance, I really think of how are we recording and tracking. The trouble call came in, we reported to it, responded to it, and we have it noted. Because I'm always thinking to myself, if a tenant has a problem, did we do the right thing? And what if this thing ends up, God forbid, ends up in court, which it never has, knock on wood, in 12 years. But the fact is, guys, when you start getting to a level where you have over 100 rental properties, you're going to end up inevitably with a tenant who becomes a pain in the ass and starts putting in maintenance calls for no reason. We've had 1 or 2 of those over the years. And we can prove on paper, hey, this person called us and we responded, the same day or the next day, and then they called us again, and we did, so we have a tracking. So we use Propertyware, but there's also Appfolio, and there's a couple other ones out there.
Yeah.
But I mean, once you can afford some sort of tracking system, try to force the tenants into a portal or through like a call route type system or some kind of cheaper system where at least you can track. It's not just your cell phone record that they're calling. God forbid that they're actually calling your cell phone. I hope not. But at the early stages, try to get them to go through a portal of some sort.
Put it in the lease that there are specific protocol to go through when reporting these items. So if you're out of the country, out of the state, and you can't get to your cell phone and they're only calling your cell phone, the lease is spelled out that these are the maintenance protocols to take, and they didn't follow it. So if they want to take that action further, they're actually in violation of their lease because they didn't follow the proper protocols.
Yeah. So the next thing I wrote down was nice, right? I think the challenge is that everybody wants to be a nice landlord, and what it becomes inevitably is it becomes like this downward spiral, right? Like this black hole of death that people fall into, right? They think being a nice landlord becomes becoming like an amiable, like trustworthy, you have to be able to get a hold of me at all times. Folks, being a nice landlord is being a professional landlord. So immediately, if you're going to start buying investment properties, I don't care if the property is in your own personal name, just start an LLC that you can run the rent through. You want your tenants to believe that they're paying a corporation that manages the company, even if the property is in your own personal name. So, if you have a professional corporation set up, I was in a mastermind group a couple weeks ago. I was in Ohio at a friend of mine's event, and it really hit home to me because I didn't really comprehend it until he said it. And he said the reason why you hate being a landlord, for those of you that have 15, 20, 30 properties, the reason you hate it is you have trained your tenants to believe that on the first of the month you're going to run around and pick up the rent. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, how is that possible? That can't be possible because we have over 100 properties under management, and I don't even know it is the first of the month sometimes. In fact, I don't find out till the 7th or 8th or 9th of the month that maybe we have 1 or 2 eviction letters going out because people are late on their rent. All of our rent comes through automatically. When people sign a lease with us, they're required to set up an ACH auto draft out of their account. They have to either put it on a credit card or a checking account. It's automated. There are no checks that come into this office, right? Everything's drafted out of account. That's a professional way to handle it. Now, we do have, I would say, slightly higher end tenants. We don't have people paying us $250 a month or $600 a month. I mean, our lowest end tenant is $850 or something like that. But that's not an excuse for why you have to be the nice guy who's literally going to drive to their house, excuse me, and put your hand out and ask them to give you a check. That's not being nice, that's being unprofessional. And people will take advantage of unprofessional. If you're a landlord and you're waiting for your cell phone to ring on the first of the month for someone to tell you that the rent is available for you to come get, then you're not a landlord, you're a gopher.
You're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah. Anything to add to that?
No, and again, just put the rent protocol in the lease, so they know what it is. And I mean, essentially, if the less work they have to do, the better. At the beginning of the lease term, they set up their banking information, they set up their auto draft, and then it's there every month. They don't have to do anything, and I mean, most of them prefer that. And you want tenants that prefer that because that means that they're responsible.
100%. Yeah, we call that future pacing, right? When you put the legwork up front, they might say to you like, oh, that sounds like a pain in the ass. Well, actually it's not, right? It makes it super easy for you. Your only responsibility is making sure that the checking account has enough money in it on the first, and then you don't have to write a check ever again, right? It's awesome. It's easy, right? It's super easy. It's almost like your car payment. Anything else can come out of there automatically. Just make sure the money's there, right? So it's no different. And if they give you grief about it, right? The drawback, the fallback is like, well, are you expecting to have a hard time putting the money in there at the first of the month? Because we might have a different conversation, right? Most of our tenants, should be solvent enough to not have that issue. Okay, and then the last thing I wrote here was goals, Dom. Like, I think if you're setting out to be a landlord, and you should decide ahead of time. Am I going to add a certain amount of units? How am I going to add them? What do I expect out of this whole thing, right? Because I think a lot of misconception happens around being an investor. There's a lot of cash flow. Is there going to be cash flow? How much am I going to make? How much time am I going to invest in this thing? Where's the money coming from, and so forth? So, in your experience property managing, I know you managed for others in the past, right? What have you seen as far as, people building portfolios and stuff like that?
So, especially in New Jersey, when it comes to property taxes, cash flow is sometimes minimal. But the benefits are still there from a tax standpoint, from an equity building standpoint, from a property maintenance standpoint. You have someone in there taking care of a property that otherwise could be vacant. But yes, the name of the game is cash flow. You try to get that at all costs, and there are ways to go about that. But even if you're not getting cash flow, there are still a lot of benefits to owning property and leasing it out to tenants.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, guys, if you're watching this video and you find value in it, we appreciate it. Make sure you share it with others. If you're watching this on some sort of social media site, if you're on our email list and you're watching it and you're looking to add cash flowing assets to your portfolio, make sure you send us a reply, and we'll make sure we put you on there. Find out exactly what it is you're looking for, so we can help you find that particular piece that might make sense for you. We can hook you up with Dom and give you a little bit better education if you need that. And of course, our dispositions team is constantly coming up with great deals. We'd love to find out exactly what it is you're buying, so we can help pinpoint that particular deal, and we can try to create that opportunity for you. So thanks again for watching, and look forward to shooting future videos for you.